Elon, great to see you.
Hi. Hello.
Well, Elon, you're with the Congress of Neurosurgeons, and as I was just sharing with the group, really enjoyed our time together recently. And I thought for those who hadn't had an opportunity to work and be exposed to Neuralink's technology, you could just share a little bit about your founder story and what made you interested in brain computer interface in the first place.
Sure. This is going to sound somewhat esoteric and maybe a bit strange, but I was actually trying to figure out how to mitigate the risk of digital superintelligence. To the degree that we can improve our bandwidth to our digital tertiary self, I think we can better align artificial intelligence with a collective human will. Like I said, it's going to sound very strange, but so you can think of like basically our intelligence is being divided into roughly three areas. There's sort of like a limbic system, but like the sort of instinctual elements, the sort of like the cortex and the planning part. But then we also have a tertiary layer, which is all the computers and phones, applications, software that we use. So that you have a digital tertiary self. Basically, we're already an android, effectively. And in fact, I think people feel this when they forget their phone. Forgetting your phone, leaving your phone behind is like having missing limb syndrome. Like you're missing your part of your digital tertiary element. The constraint on human-machine symbiosis is bandwidth. What is especially output bandwidth? The output bandwidth of a human is less than 1 bit per second over the course of a day. So if you have 86,400 seconds in a day, the number of output bits that you produce, maybe there's some rare cases where it's about 1 bit per second, but very few people produce 86,400 output bits that's a rare situation. So most people are averaging less than 1 bit per second over a 24-hour period. And when we do speak, they say the number of symbols per second of speech or typing is quite low, especially if it's going through a phone. And you just sort of have two slow-moving meat sticks that are trying to type letters on a phone. So you really have just a few, taps per second of characters. So your phone is like sitting there, and your phone is like a supercomputer in your hands, and it is desperately trying to figure out what you want to say.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, I personally experienced that phantom limb. What prompted your interest in Neuralink?
Yeah, so basically, I thought, okay, if we're going to have, in order to have better human AI symbiosis, we must solve the bandwidth problem. In the limit, this really becomes pretty extreme. Like when you've got a tree in your garden, that tree is actually communicating. It is just communicating very slowly.
Yeah.
If you do a time-lapse video of the tree, you can see that the tree is actually interacting and communicating with its environment, but at such a slow speed that it appears to be stationary. So below a certain bandwidth, we are basically just stationary to a computer. At 1 bit per second, that's a very low data rate when computers are doing trillions of bits per second.
Yeah, I think you're going to have a challenge in communicating.
Yeah, so, well, if you say like, okay, we need to have ultimately a million bits per second or a billion bits per second, gigabit per second interface, then that means you can't you need an implant. And ultimately we'll need to replace like the skull, and it's going to be a zillion wire. This is some bizarre sci-fi stuff, and this is certainly optional, hopefully.
That's good. Mandatory replacement of my skull was a problem.
Mandatory chip and brain is not what we're saying here for sure. But at a certain point, you say like, okay, in order, how many electrodes are needed in order to interface with have a whole brain interface?
Yeah, you know,
it's a lot of
go ahead.
a lot of electrodes.
Yeah, you know, I've heard you mention that larger goal.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so long-term goal, like I said, is mitigating civilizational risk associated with a divergence of biological and digital intelligence. That's the long-term goal. Obviously, then you got to parse that into, well, what are we going to do tomorrow?
Yeah.
So the starting point with the first Neuralink device is 1,000 electrodes, and we've with just 100, if only 100 of those electrodes are active, if you take say our first few patients, you know, we are setting world records. Admittedly, these are world records that are pretty low, but we're getting you know, around 10 bits per second, and there's a path to, you know, 1,000 bits per second, which would be literally 100 times more than the next record.
So you're beating a lot of trees, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're really trying to understand where this tree wants to go.
Yeah.
You know, and try to, yeah. So there's also some risk at first. So we want to do the implants in where there's the highest gain and the least risk. So that's so we call the first implant telepathy, which really just it's interfacing with the motor cortex, and you know, and it's basically looking at signals as though somebody moved their arm, and just reading that signal and then sending that signal to the patient's phone or computer, so they can then move the cursor around just by thinking. If people have seen the videos of Nolan, it's pretty impressive what he can do. In fact, shortly after getting the implant, he spent all night playing video games just by thinking.
Yeah, and those are the records you're talking about, and those.
We'll get to the point pretty quickly where someone with a Neuralink implant will outperform somebody who's using their hands to play a video game.
What do you think the timeline for that is? We won't hold you to it.
Sure. I mean, I do have a habit of being optimistic with respect to timelines. If I wasn't optimistic, I wouldn't be starting these companies. Probably.
Yeah, that's fair.
So, but I think, given that we're already pretty much at a point where we're pretty close to on par with the video game, you play a video game at a comparable level to someone with hands. I think with our second generation device, which will have 3,000 electrodes, and we'll get a lot better at placing those electrodes. So I think we'll have, you know, for our first device, in the first patient we had like a 10%, roughly 10% yield. So it's only 100 electrodes being effective. So we'll both improve the yield and we'll increase the number of electrodes. So we'll go from say 100 electrodes that are reading to, I don't know, out of 3,000 electrodes, maybe 15.5, so like 1,500 are reading. So at that point, the data rate is far in excess of what someone playing a video game with their hands could do. And we can reduce the latency, so really the moment you think of a move, it happens instantly on the computer, as opposed to what, you know, currently if you play a video game, you have to like move your hand. So that's like you've got to send signals to the muscles have to move. Your finger takes a certain amount of time to move. So you basically got to move the meat puppet.
Yeah. You know, I have to say, when
slow moving puppet, and if you don't have to move, actuate the muscles in your hand, and because you know your finger's going to move at a certain, you know, certain rate, like millimeters per second. But if you don't have to do any of that, you can literally think it immediately with no latency. You'll outperform someone who has to use the hands.
Yeah, you know, it's
I think within a couple of years, basically.
No, I think as surgeons we really.
Yeah. So I think the ophthalmology analogy is the right one, where with LASIK, you've got an ophthalmologist who will oversee, I don't know, perhaps a half dozen or a dozen LASIK machines, and just make sure the machine is the patient getting the right operation in the correct eye, and is the machine operating properly? But thereafter, the patient will sit in the laser chair, and the robot's going to basically laser your eyeball.
Yeah.
And now this is much better than someone getting a hand laser and hand lasering your eyeball, which would be, have varying results.
I think you'd have some customers for blind sight if that was actually the approach.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think it'll be something similar to LASIK, where perhaps a neurosurgeon overseeing half a dozen or a dozen of the Neuralink robots that are doing the implants, and just obviously making sure it's the right implant in the right location for the right purpose, and that everything's okay with the patient. So it would be like a massive amplification. I think and it's kind of necessary that it be a massive amplification, because there simply are not enough neurosurgeons to do this all by hand. It's like physically impossible.
Yeah.
Because we're talking about ultimately, doing tens of millions of these things. Like maybe there's 8 billion people in the world. I don't know, maybe at least a few billion are going to want this, maybe more. So then, how do you get literally billions of devices?
Yeah.
Unless you got the robots, it's not happening.
Yeah, so I've heard you frame the introduction of the robot as not just a precision issue, but an interest of workforce and scale, and there's obviously a little over 3,000 of us nationally, so that would be a little bit challenging. Can you share a little bit in kind of this early journey?
But I've certainly come to understand more than most. Well, they're both quite challenging. It's bizarre that I'm involved in both. I think there are of similar magnitude of difficulty, especially.
So the story checks out.
Yes, I think nobody's out there thinking, what's easy, brain surgery and rockets.
Okay, perfect. Thanks for backing us up. We appreciate it.
Yeah, 100%. No, that's legit. Brain surgery is super hard, and rockets are super hard, and there's a reason that they're idiomatic expressions. This is no accident. Very difficult. Especially as you try to scale the electrodes, number of electrodes, we don't know how to ultimately get to say how do we do 1 million electrodes. We don't know how to do that yet, except that hopefully it is physically possible.
Yeah, we just know that we need it, right?
Well, if you want to have a high bandwidth whole brain interface, then I think probably the right order of magnitude is something like 1 million electrodes. And that still has a very high ratio of neurons to electrodes. So that means you've got to try to, like any given electrode has to be able to read neurons from, several, I don't know, 100 or 1,000 neurons. So if you've got 1 million electrodes and each electrode can read 1,000 neurons, so you've got access to 1 billion neurons. Just still not that high, actually.
Yeah.
But hopefully high enough.
I know the goal with
ultimately help tens of millions of people, maybe hundreds of millions of people. I should say also there's potential going beyond the brain to, like, if somebody's got a sort of spinal cord injury, that being able to transmit the signals. So, like the ideal, I think what most people that have lost the connection between their brain and their body would like is to reanimate their body.
Sure.
There are some approximations of that where you can animate, say, a robot suit or a robot arm or something like that. But I think most people will be asking, like, what would you prefer? Oh, I'd like my body to work again.
Sure.
So that if provided the neurons are still kind of there, it should be. It's certainly physically possible to shunt the signals from the motor cortex past the point where the damage has occurred to the neurons that then interface with your muscles and your arms and legs. System, like if you severed like some Ethernet cables, what would you do? Well, you bridge the signal. Okay, great. The same thing can be done with the human body. Bridge the electrical signals and the communication signals. So you've got sensors and actuators, and the signals, the bidirectional signals from sensors and actuators are being interrupted. And so if you shunt the signals, you will be able to reanimate the body.
Yeah, and you know,
Yeah, so the device itself, in volume, should not be super expensive. I mean, hopefully it's like, I don't know, $5,000 to $10,000, and very high volume, it should start to approximate the cost of an Apple Watch or a phone. So maybe it's $1,000 or $2,000, something like that. And then if it's implanted with a robot, then that surgical procedure should be fast. We do have a game plan for what I call the 600-second surgery. So 10 minutes, you sit in the chair, 10 minutes later you have an implant, 600 seconds. And we're not violating physics. So, just as with LASIK, you know, it goes in a laser, does a whole bunch of things to your eyeball. Now you have to automate basically everything here. But if you break it down second by second, it is possible to have a 600-second or 10-minute surgery. And so at that point, if it's being done by a robot and the whole thing takes 10 minutes, I think it probably, the whole thing, all-inclusive, ends up being, you know, on the order of $5,000 maybe, similar to LASIK.
mm-hmm. You know, it's interesting, a terrific conversation. You have all of neurosurgery in the room here, and so what are maybe some last thoughts you'd like to leave us with?
Well, I think this is going to be something that is an incredibly, you know, powerful tool for neurosurgeons, for helping, you know, fix things that are brain-related issues. It's sort of like, you know, I don't know, it might be like the difference between, if it was a weapon situation, difference between like bows and arrows and jet airplanes. Like, it's a big difference. You know, so we want to give you.
I hope I have the airplane. in that
Yeah, in a positive, constructive way. One can only do as well as the tools that one is getting. You know, it's like, what tools do you have? And I think with by essentially giving neurosurgeons a much more sophisticated, powerful tool like the Neuralink device, you could really help a lot of people.
Terrific, and I know that's why we're all here.